Three teens laughed at an old legend before stepping into the woods. The forest didn't laugh back, it waited. They vanished without a trace, but the forest never let go. 18 years later, it whispered their names back through bone and ash. It started with the wind. Not the kind that rustles through leaves or whistles past tree trunks, but a low, steady exhale that seemed to rise from the soil itself. Ranger Elias Brewer paused on the ridge, one hand resting on the cracked bark of a pine older than memory. He'd walked this trail for over 15 years, boots worn by the same stones, the same climbs. But this morning, something felt different. The forest was awake, not in the usual, gentle rhythm of shifting seasons, but in a way that watched. The call came in just after dawn. A hunter's blind collapsed during the night. Routine check, nothing urgent. But the voice on the other end had hesitated, said something about the smell, not rot, not animal, like a fire that burned itself out years ago. Brewer followed the trail marker until it disappeared into brush. The old blind was hidden between two ridges, barely visible, now just a few splinters of wood jutting like broken ribs from the earth. The structure had caved in completely, sagging into a pit of disturbed soil. Before we descend any deeper into the chilling mystery of the three teenagers, the scorched ritual site, and the shadow crowned in smoke, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue unearthing the stories that were buried, sometimes literally for years. Every subscriber brings us closer to the truth that was never supposed to surface. Thank you for being part of this. He crouched low, breath steaming in the chill air, and saw it. Bone. Not fresh. The pale curve of a skull, half swallowed by moss. Charred ribs collapsed inward like a chest in prayer. One femur, blackened, angled toward the tree line as if still trying to crawl away. He didn't speak, not out loud. But in his mind, something began to tally. Human. Young, maybe. Too much bone for one, not enough for three. He moved the brush aside with the butt of his flashlight, careful not to touch anything directly. Another rib, and another. Then he saw the teeth, still intact in the jaw, small, slightly crooked, not childlike but not adult either. The wind rose again, curling through the valley like a breath held too long. It stirred the ash that had settled deep in the soil, revealing a burnt pattern beneath the wreckage. A circle, almost perfect, marked with stones blackened and split. Brewer reached for his radio, then stopped. No signal, not here, not this deep. He stood slowly, pulse hammering like a drum inside his throat. The forest behind him was silent. Unnaturally so. No birdsong, no squirrels in the canopy, no chirp of insects. He knew this wasn't the first time. Back in '09, two surveyors vanished not far from here. Their gear was found, but not their bodies. A year before that, a girl disappeared after a fight with her boyfriend. He claimed she ran into the woods. They never found a trace. But this was different. This was a message, dug up from underneath time itself. Not by accident, by release. Elias Brewer didn't believe in ghosts. But he believed in memory. And some places, he'd learned, remember what people forget. Remember it with roots and stone and bone. And sometimes, when the ground is ready, it gives that memory back. As he turned to leave, the air grew still again. No breeze, no movement. But in the hush, he thought he heard something faint, almost imperceptible. 3 names. Spoken not in voice, but in echo. Like the trees were whispering them back to him, one by one. August 2004 began like any other humid end of summer weekend in Trussell County. The air hung thick with heat and anticipation, those final fleeting days before school resumed, and the small town settled back into routine. For Amber Cho, Mason Riley, and Tyler Vance, it was supposed to be one last taste of freedom. One final stretch of road before the weight of senior year, of college applications, of everything that came next. They weren't close friends, not really, but they shared the same aching desire to escape the dull thrum of suburbia. Maybe that was enough. The car was borrowed, Tyler's older cousin's Jeep, lifted and already dented from too many back roads. No one asked permission. It didn't feel like stealing. It felt like claiming something that was already halfway theirs. They loaded it with warm soda, an old camcorder, a plastic gas can, and a weathered copy of a book Amber swore she'd found in a thrift store bin, something about rituals and forest deities and offerings for the old watchers of the woods. They left late on a Friday afternoon. Mason told his parents he'd be back Sunday night. Amber left a note on the fridge. "Gone camping, don't wait up." Tyler didn't say anything at all. His mother was working nights, and his father hadn't asked where he was going in years. The Jeep was seen once, around dusk, passing through the last gas station on Route 18. The cashier remembered them only vaguely. A girl with bangs, laughing too loudly. A boy in the backseat rolling a cigarette he never lit. Another driving, serious-eyed, barely glancing up. The security footage caught their taillights disappearing into the trees. After that, they were gone. By Monday morning, calls were made. First uncertain, then frantic. But the urgency faded as hours turned to days. The sheriff at the time, a man known more for traffic stops than investigations, dismissed the panic quickly. "They'll come back when they're hungry," he said. "Or broke." When they didn't, he offered another theory: runaways. Maybe the kids just didn't want to be found. Teenagers do stupid things. It happens. The search was brief. A few volunteers, some dogs. Nothing was found. Not a tire track, not a shoe, not a thread of clothing. No fires reported, no sightings, just silence. The families mourned differently. Amber's mother taped missing posters to every storefront, her fingers raw from staples and rain. Mason's parents hired a private investigator, who took their money and returned nothing. Tyler's father never asked once where his son had gone. Some said he was relieved. Years passed, and the story grew soft around the edges. It became a campfire tale, a cautionary whisper in classrooms. Don't follow the old trails. Don't mock the stories. Don't go looking for what doesn't want to be found. But underneath the legend was still something raw, something unspoken. Because the forest didn't see it as a case gone cold. It didn't see missing posters or police reports. The forest saw movement. It saw offerings. It saw a circle drawn in laughter and defiance, and the kind of belief that doesn't know its belief yet. The kind that slips through cracks and opens doors without knowing. And when they crossed the threshold, 3 teenagers, 1 borrowed car, a long weekend, the forest didn't forget. It never does. It began like most things that end in silence, casually, without weight. A name passed around like a dare in whispered conversations at the edge of gym bleachers and lunchroom tables. The Fire Watcher. None of them had heard it before. Not from teachers, not from parents, but it found them all the same. Amber had come across the story first, buried in a dog-eared paperback with no cover, slipped between VHS tapes in the corner of a thrift shop no one remembered entering. The book wasn't horror, not exactly. It read more like a field journal rambling, half-poetic entries about places where the trees grew older than memory, where fire moved without wind, where something stood sentinel over the woods. Watching. Always watching. She read the best passages out loud during their late-night drives. Mason laughed at them, of course. Said it was just hippie trash or some forgotten Dungeons and Dragons campaign someone had written too seriously. Tyler didn't laugh as much. He didn't speak much at all, just stared out at the forest slipping by the car window like a second sky turned sideways. The legend had rules. That's what made it fun. You had to carve a ring perfectly round using ash or riverstone. You had to offer something that meant something. No trash, no coins. Real things. Blood, in some cases, or breath, trapped in jars. And most importantly, you had to believe. Really believe. Or else it would see through you. It would burn only what was real. They joked about it constantly, called themselves cult leaders, drew crude sigils on notebook covers and bathroom stalls. Amber wrote, "F.W. is watching on the fogged mirror in the school's theater dressing room." Then laughed when someone cried during rehearsal and said they felt watched. Tyler once showed up with a lighter duct tape to his palm and said it was tribute. Mason kept filming everything shaky camcorder footage with red-eye flash and fake chants they made up on the spot. The tape was always rolling. But something shifted in the final week. The laughter became quieter, less frequent. There was one night, Mason's birthday, when they gathered behind the old cemetery with a circle of stolen candles and burned a lock of Amber's hair. It was supposed to be a joke, but no one smiled when the wind stopped, when every flame tilted sideways as if pulled toward the tree line. Tyler threw up on his shoes. No one said anything about it. After that, Amber stopped reading the book out loud. They didn't talk about the ritual anymore, not in public. But they met more often, whispered more. Amber started sketching shapes in the margins of her class, notes tight loops with too many eyes. Mason stopped bringing the camcorder. Tyler said he dreamed of trees burning from the inside out, roots glowing like coals, faces watching through the bark. "We're not mocking it anymore," he mumbled once. "We're part of it." By the time they left that Friday in August, the book was no longer just a story. It was a script, a blueprint, a calling. They had laughed at the ritual, called it theater, pretend. But belief is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive as trust or faith. Sometimes, it slips through the cracks as fear, as dread you can't quite explain, as a dare you take because you don't want to be the only one left behind. And deep in the forest, something old had listened, not to their words, but to the shift beneath them, the seriousness behind the silence. The ritual they'd once mocked had finally found its believers. Amber Cho had always kept a journal, even before it became fashionable. Not the cutesy kind with glitter pens or padlocks, but a battered black notebook filled with poems too fragmented to be called poetry, song lyrics rewritten in the margins, sketches of trees, faces, keys. She used it to survive boredom, mostly, to dump the static from her head. But in the final weeks of that summer, her entries took on a different tone, less like musings, more like a slow unraveling. The pages leading up to the last entry are dense with half-thoughts. Some scratched out entirely. Mentions of Mason, of Tyler, of dreams she couldn't fully remember but woke up sweating from. "The fire was in the trees again," she wrote once. But it wasn't spreading, just waiting. Like it wanted someone to see it. On another page, Tyler keeps picking at his arm like something's under his skin. "He won't tell me what he saw in the mirror that night. Maybe I don't want to know." The handwriting changed gradually. It slanted more, became heavier, pressed deeper into the paper, as if she were trying to make the words stay. On the second-to-last page, she drew what looked like a ring of stones. Around it, eyes. Not human ones. Long and almond-shaped, like embers pulled into slits. Beneath that, "The forest is older than the bones inside it. I think it remembers the people who try to speak its name." Then the final page. The ink is smeared, water warped, like tears had fallen before it dried. The sentence structure is choppy, some words underlined 3-4 times. "We're going." She didn't bother with a date, just those two words, followed by a pause. Then, "Not because we believe it." The rest of the paragraph trails down like a spiral. The kind of writing that feels like someone arguing with themselves as they write. Not because we believe it, just because we want to feel something real, because everything else feels fake. College, work, parents who can't even look you in the eyes anymore. What if the ritual is fake too? But what if it's not? What if the only real thing left is in the woods? We go in circles every day, pretending this isn't all made up. Maybe it's better to choose what makes you afraid. At least then, you know what's coming. There's a break, a blank space. Then, scrawled in the corner, nearly illegible. I think it already knows we're coming. That sentence is followed by a small burn mark, just the edge of the page, browned and curled like someone briefly held a lighter too close. The rest of the journal was recovered later, sealed in a plastic evidence bag, catalogued and boxed with other belongings. A backpack, some Polaroids, a silver ring that may have belonged to Mason. No one knows if Amber wrote anything after that. If she carried the journal into the forest, or left it behind on purpose. But the tone of her final entry lingered like smoke. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a warning. It was a surrender. She hadn't believed in the Firewatcher. Not really. But belief was never the point. The forest didn't care if they believed. It only cared that they came. Elias Brewer used to be the kind of man people trusted without asking why. The kind who knew every trail in the valley by memory, who could read cloud patterns like road signs, who helped find lost dogs and wandering children before the sun dipped too low. He wasn't the chatty type, but he was steady, dependable. A man who walked the forest not like it belonged to him, but like he belonged to it. That was before the bones. Now, Brewer rarely goes into town. He doesn't take calls. He doesn't respond to the ranger station's holiday invitations or retirement notices. His house sits alone at the tree line, roof sagging under years of neglect, porch sagging under the weight of silence. If anyone drives past late enough, they might catch a glimpse of an old man in a rocking chair, one hand wrapped around a dented thermos, the other never far from the shotgun propped against the doorframe. They say he hasn't set foot in the woods since that day. The official report was brief. Clinical. Partial human remains discovered beneath a collapsed hunting blind in the eastern quadrant. Evidence of prolonged exposure and possible combustion. The Forest Service sent 2 investigators. They asked questions. Brewer answered them, but only once. After that, he stopped talking. Not long after the discovery, one of the investigators, Carl Dessen, 42, father of 3, requested reassignment. The other took an indefinite leave of absence. Brewer never asked why. He already knew. It wasn't animals, he said once, during a brief visit from the sheriff. The words were gravel in his throat. And it sure as hell wasn't kids playing witch. That was the last time he let someone onto his porch. He didn't describe the scorch pattern, or the way the bones had folded inward, as if pulled toward a center that no longer existed. He didn't talk about the stones arranged in perfect symmetry, blackened and humming faintly with warmth despite the winter chill. He didn't mention the ring of trees surrounding the site, all of them alive, untouched, and yet bent ever so slightly inward, like they were watching something at their feet. But sometimes, if you catch him just after dusk, before the lights come on, you might hear him muttering to himself. Just fragments, not full sentences. Names, maybe. Or prayers. Or something in between. His neighbors say he sleeps in shifts now, never more than 2 hours at a time. He keeps the thermos close, some say it's coffee, others swear it's whiskey, but always, the shotgun remains nearby. Not polished, not ceremonial, loaded. One night, during a heavy storm, a local teenager knocked on Brewer's door. His truck had broken down nearby, and his phone had no signal. Brewer didn't open the door. He didn't speak through it, either. But the kid swore he saw someone move past the window slowly, deliberately, and then the porch light flicked off. The next day, the teen's truck started on the first turn. No explanation. He didn't come back. People talk, of course. Say Brewer lost his mind out there. Say solitude does that to a man. But there's a quiet reverence in how they say it. Like they know something sacred and terrible happened out there, and that the silence Brewer carries isn't madness, it's memory. Preserved, like ash on an altar. And though he's never gone back, some nights, The trees still creak toward his house, and the wind carries with it the scent of smoke, not wood, not fire. Something older, something waiting. The report was filed on August 14, 2004, 2 days after the teenagers disappeared. It was simple, almost forgettable. A couple hiking the northern ridge of Warden's Hollow had spotted smoke rising from the valley below. Thick, dark columns curling up into the sky without warning, visible even through the summer haze. The man, a retired schoolteacher, had described it as too black to be a campfire. His wife had said it looked like it came from the ground itself, as if the earth was exhaling. They weren't the only ones to see it. A fire watch volunteer stationed 15 miles out noted an anomalous plume on the same afternoon, marked it in his logbook, and radioed it in. The signal dropped mid-sentence. It came back moments later, but the voice on the other end was different, quieter, slower. He never mentioned it again, and no one followed up. Just one of those technical glitches no one likes explaining. By the time the fire crews arrived, the smoke was gone. They hiked in with gear and packs, calling out as they moved through the underbrush, expecting signs of an illegal burn, maybe a careless camper's mistake. But there was nothing. No embers. No scorched trees. No scent of smoke. The forest was damp, eerily so for a late summer evening. A thin mist clung low to the ground, curling around boots and ankles like it had been waiting for them. Birds had gone silent. Even the insects had vanished into the trees. They swept the area with thermal scopes. Nothing. The ground temperature read cool, even unusually so. One of the younger responders joked that the forest was gaslighting them. No one laughed. They packed up before nightfall, unsettled by how still the world had become. The official dispatch logged the event as unsubstantiated visual anomaly, and the file was quietly closed. But the couple who made the call couldn't let it go. They returned to the ridge a week later, same time of day, same route, and found something else. Where there had once been moss and rock was now a ring. Subtle, but visible. Stones had been placed with careful spacing. Lichen scraped clean. In the center, a circle of earth packed hard and dry, like it had been burned, but without any of the usual signs. No ash, no scent, no damage to the surrounding growth. They took photos, showed them to a park ranger. He dismissed it, said people make all kinds of weird markings in the woods. Teenagers, mostly. Probably just a prank. But the couple insisted it hadn't been there before. The ranger didn't argue. He just took the photos, slipped them into a drawer, and never brought them up again. Years later, those photos would resurface, found in the belongings of a ranger who'd retired early. The prints had faded slightly, but the stones were still visible. The shape unmistakable. Nearly perfect. And the oddest thing of all, when forensic analysts were asked to examine the original negatives, they noted that the sky in the images appeared unusually overexposed, almost washed out. As if some light source had pulsed behind the lens just before the shutter clicked. But no one had reported light. Only smoke, rising from nowhere, moving against the wind. And when it vanished, it left no trace, only a silence that stretched too far. And a feeling, buried in the back of the mind, that something had been watching from below. The town moved on, or at least pretended to. School started again, leaves turned. The sheriff stopped answering questions, but the parents didn't move on. They couldn't. For them, time didn't pass, it hovered. Days stretched long and brittle, and nights folded into each other like bruises that never fully faded. The kind of ache that lived just under the skin. Amber's mother, Carla Cho, kept the porch light on for 13 years. Every night, same bulb. When one burned out, she replaced it within the hour. Neighbors said it was sad, even pathetic. But they said it quietly. No one dared tell her to stop. Mason's father, Gregory Riley, developed a habit of driving with one hand on the wheel and the other perched against the door, fingers twitching every time he saw movement in the woods. A flash of a jacket. A forgotten backpack. A boot print in the mud. He pulled over 6 times in 2006 alone. Once, it was a tarp weighed down with stones. Another time, a deer carcass curled oddly on the shoulder. He never found what he was looking for, and he never said what that was. But he always left the engine running, like he wasn't sure he'd come back. Then, the dreams began. At first, no one spoke about them. Dreams are private, embarrassing, even. But the grief group that formed 2 years after the disappearance, the one the sheriff's wife quietly started in the church basement, eventually cracked them open. One woman, whose son had only known Tyler in passing, said she woke one night gasping, not from a nightmare, but from a sound. A high-pitched whine, like a scream stretched into static. It felt familiar, like it came from inside her ears. She wasn't alone. Amber's mother dreamed of walking barefoot down a road made of ash. Not burned asphalt, actual ash, soft and choking. In the dream, she knew if she stepped off it, she'd disappear. But the road curved endlessly, always leading her back to a clearing with 3 chairs, all facing outward, all empty. Tyler's uncle, a man who hadn't cried since '92, said he dreamed of smoke coming through the vents in his house. He tried to scream for help but only coughed. Through the haze, he saw something moving past his hallway, mirror something not quite human, but not unfamiliar either. The dreams varied, but one detail repeated. Always toward the end, a voice would say something muffled, distant, like it was trapped behind old radio glass. Then came the screaming. And then, without fail, smoke. Some sought explanations: trauma, unresolved grief, subconscious echoes of loss. Therapists tried. Medications numbed. But the dreams didn't stop. If anything, they grew more frequent around anniversaries. They intensified during wildfires, even ones hundreds of miles away. One year, during a particularly dry summer, the fire department received multiple calls from different ends of the county reports of burning trees with faces. A girl standing in the road covered in soot. A teenager screaming from inside a hollow tree. Nothing was ever found. Some parents moved away, others stayed, suspended in that strange ritual of waiting. Porch lights on, keys near the door, photos framed in plastic that had started to yellow. Hope was too painful. So they leaned into habit instead. Because even if the children weren't coming back, the forest still held something. And each night, when sleep finally came, it did not bring rest. It brought static, it brought smoke. It brought that whisper again, low and broken, begging to be heard. Or remembered. The photos weren't meant to be seen by the public. They weren't released to the press or archived in the usual way. Someone leaked them, no one knows who. A scanned folder passed anonymously to a local journalist, then quietly buried after one cautious article stirred more fear than answers. The images weren't sensational. They didn't need to be. The horror was in their precision. Scorched stones, 10 of them, each blackened as if by fire, arranged in a ring that was almost too perfect for human hands. Not mechanical, there were irregularities. But the spacing, the curvature, the alignment to the surrounding trees, it had intention. Not random, not careless. The kind of shape that felt older than language, older than whatever names people tried to give it. Each stone was carved. Symbols marked deep into the surface, some with straight edges, others with looping curves that mimicked vines or smoke. Not letters, not runes. Nothing that matched local tribal iconography or known cult symbology. Just marks that made the eye ache if you stared too long. One officer described them as looking like they were trying to move, even on paper. Another said they made her feel like she was being watched, even when she flipped the photo upside down. In the center of the ring, a depression in the earth, about 3 feet across. Not a hole. A hollow, shallow, and smooth, as if something had rested there for years and only just stood up. The soil inside was darker than the surrounding ash. and according to the ranger's notes, unnaturally dry even after a week of rain. And then, the teeth. Not scattered like from an animal kill. Placed, arranged around the edge of the circle like sentinels. Human molars. Some cracked, others whole. All of them blackened and fused at the root, as if exposed to heat from the inside out. Forensics confirmed at least 2 of them were a dental match for Amber Cho and Mason Riley. Tyler's were never recovered, or maybe never placed. The vegetation around the site had begun to rot in a perfect radius. Not burned, not trampled, just wilted. Grasses collapsed in on themselves, trees with bark gone soft and damp. Animals avoided it. Rangers placed trail cameras to monitor the site, but after 2 nights, the batteries drained. All of them. One camera briefly captured footage of a deer approaching from the northern trail. The moment it reached the edge of the circle, it froze, eyes wide. Then it bolted so fast the camera didn't track it leaving. No tracks ever crossed the stones again. Not bird, not fox, not squirrel. It was as if the site had been written out of the forest's ecology. Some believe the circle was part of the ritual, the final offering before the 3 teenagers disappeared. Others believe it was a result, a scar left behind by something that was called, that answered, and that never fully left. A few investigators, the ones who reviewed the photos late at night, began to dream. Circles of smoke, teeth embedded in soil, and always, just outside the ring of fire, something tall and still. Watching. Always watching. For nearly 2 decades, the clearing remained untouched. Not by people. There were no trails that led to it, no signs, no reason to walk that deep into the fold of the woods, but by time itself. Nature, normally so eager to reclaim what is broken or dead, seemed instead to shield the place, as if honoring a pact, as if hiding something not from human eyes but from memory. The oak fell in the winter of 2005, during one of the heaviest snowstorms in Trussell County's history. A tree older than any living resident, its trunk split at the base, as if something hollowed it from the inside. Locals blamed rot. Wind. Some said lightning, though no one recalled thunder. But when it fell, it landed precisely across the site, its sprawling roots crawling outward like fingers, clawing across the burned circle beneath. By spring, its canopy had collapsed fully over the area, blocking out the sun and forming a low, natural ceiling that turned the clearing into a vault. Moss crept over the stones. Leaves drifted in year after year, forming layers that held moisture, decay, and silence. The forest seemed to fold inward around it. Birds avoided the branches overhead. Saplings sprouted in circles around the perimeter, never within. When the wind blew, it curved around the clearing. Sound dulled there. It wasn't quiet. Quiet could be peaceful but muted, like standing underwater. Trails nearby began to fade. The ones that once cut close to the area simply shifted. Trees grew crooked toward other directions, blocking paths with unnatural insistence. Even seasoned hunters reported losing their bearings near Warden's Hollow. GPS would glitch. Compasses spun. Dogs refused to track scent lines through the northern stretch of the valley, whining or lying down outright when pulled toward it. Aerial surveys conducted in the early 2010 seconds showed nothing unusual, just a dense cluster of undergrowth and a fallen tree. Thermal imaging revealed a cold spot, barely a blip, small enough to be dismissed. The photos weren't flagged for further inspection. There were no missing persons connected to that exact spot, at least not yet. And the sheriff's department had stopped revisiting the 2004 case years earlier. But the land hadn't forgotten. It remembered in silence, in pressure, in the way certain trees leaned toward the site like mourners at a graveside. The forest didn't erase the evidence. It held it, preserved it. Not like an open wound, but like a secret pressed between pages. When the tree finally rotted through, its limbs collapsing into the hollow below, it was chance, or what seemed like it, that brought a ranger off his usual route. He was looking for a missing fawn, something simple. The trail ended near the twisted roots. A shape beneath the fallen trunk caught the corner of his eye. And then it was all there. The circle, the stones, the scorched earth untouched by weather, teeth, bone. The exact placement preserved, like someone had pressed pause on decay. As if the forest had been waiting for someone to return and look again. The ground didn't give up its dead. It held them tight until it was time. And when it was, it gave them back exactly as it had found them. Burned, arranged, remembered. The tape surfaced years after the case had gone cold, pulled from a cardboard box buried in the basement of the Rileys' old house after it was foreclosed. The camcorder was water-damaged but salvageable, wrapped in a t-shirt that still faintly smelled of smoke. Alongside it, a handful of mini DV tapes, 2 flip phones with corroded batteries, and a voicemail cassette copied from the family's old answering machine. They sat untouched for nearly a year, until a junior archivist at the county records office began the slow, tedious process of digital conversion. The first files were harmless ordinary. Clips of Mason recording their road trip, the 3 teens huddled in the backseat of the borrowed Jeep, laughing about bad directions and warm sodas. Amber holds up a map, upside down, and Tyler leans in from the back seat, deadpan, mumbling, "We're already lost." The kind of footage any kid might have made that summer, if not for where it led. As the recordings progress, things start to shift. The lighting gets darker, the laughter more spaced out. There are fewer faces on camera, more footage of the forest instead. Trees filmed at odd angles, bark panned over slowly, the lens sometimes struggling to focus as if the air itself is interfering. Static creeps in more often, not just between clips but during them. Like a whisper laid over everything. On one tape, they've reached what appears to be the edge of the clearing. The camera is unsteady, held low. Amber's voice is heard, breathless but calm, saying, "This is it. It's right. This is where it should go." She doesn't explain what island. Mason responds, laughing nervously, "Shouldn't we say something? Like, a chant or whatever?" Tyler mutters something inaudible. Then, silence, except for the wind, except it's not wind. It's rhythmic, layered, like breath turned into music, chanting, distant, and yet close enough to feel beneath the skin. The audio analysis later revealed something strange. The chanting didn't match the movement of anyone on screen. No one's mouth moved. No one was speaking. One voicemail from Amber's phone was left at 1:47 a.m., on the night they disappeared. It went to her mother's answering machine, just a few seconds long. The sound of crunching leaves, hurried breathing. Then Amber's voice, low and shaking. "Mom, it's not fake. It's real. I'm sorry, we." Then static, then nothing. Of the 2 flip phones, only one had recoverable data. A corrupted voice memo, time-stamped but undated. Mason's voice frantic. "We tried to undo it, okay? We tried. It won't let us out. Tyler's gone. Just gone. 1 minute he was here. Then the trees. A thud cuts him off. Shuffling, a wet, dragging sound. Then silence. The last camcorder clip is only 4 seconds long. The footage is pitch black. Audio only. A scream, pure, ragged, and sharp, rises into the air, cuts off mid-breath, as if something reached into the lungs and pulled the sound out like thread. For years, investigators dismissed these as teen dramatics, hoaxes, artifacts of stress. But those who watched the tapes late at night, archivists, techs, a few private detectives, described the same thing afterward. A heaviness in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes. And once, always once, hearing their names whispered when no one else was in the room. The sound of their voices didn't just document what happened. It became part of it. The forest had heard them. And now, it was letting the rest of the world hear them too. Her name was Rachel Mendez. 17 in the summer of 2004, with a cracked sense of humor and a cigarette habit she hid behind her braces. She was supposed to be the fourth. Amber had invited her, laughing as she leaned over the hood of the Jeep and whispered about the ritual weekend, calling it their own little horror movie finale. Rachel had smiled, said she'd come, even started packing a bag the night before. But something stopped her. She never explained why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was just a feeling dull and gnawing. The kind that coils in your stomach when something you love is about to be taken. The next morning, she sent Amber a single message. Can't make it. Family stuff. Rain check? She never got a reply. When the three disappeared, Rachel was questioned like everyone else. She told the truth mostly, that she'd been invited, that she bailed, that she thought it was just a camping trip. She didn't mention the notebook Amber had shown her weeks before, the one filled with circles and smoke and names written backward. She didn't say anything about the night she saw Tyler standing in her backyard at 2 in the morning, staring at her window without blinking. The guilt festered in her, quietly, her hair thinned. She stopped eating. Started walking instead hours at a time, into the woods, along back roads, sometimes barefoot, as if trying to trace their steps without knowing where they led. Then she vanished too. For 11 months, no one saw Rachel. Not at school, not at home, not online. Her phone went dead. Her room remained untouched, posters curling off the walls. A half-full bottle of Coke fossilizing on her nightstand. Her mother held on to hope longer than most. She refused to believe 2 disappearances connected to the same group of teens could happen without meaning. And then Rachel came back. She was found lying at the edge of an old service trail 20 miles from the original site. A hiker spotted her curled beneath a fern, mud caked up to her waist. Her lips split from the sundae. She was half naked, wrapped in a flannel shirt that didn't belong to her. Her feet were raw, one toe broken. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she was mumbling something too fast to understand. The hospital said she was dehydrated, underweight, suffering from prolonged exposure and shock. But the language she spoke, if it was language, wasn't identifiable. Recordings were sent to linguists and anthropologists. Nothing matched. At times it sounded like reversed syllables. Other times like a dialect from nowhere. Rachel wouldn't talk about where she'd been. Not to her mother, not to the police. But one night, just before they transferred her to a psychiatric unit, she whispered to an orderly who had been kind to her. "I saw them," she said. They were still there, burning, not screaming, not anymore, just burning from the inside out. Her eyes didn't blink when she said it. Her voice was flat, devoid of panic or grief, as though it had become normal to her. As though she'd been watching for a long, long time. After that, she stopped speaking entirely. To this day, no one knows where she went during those 11 months. Her footprints were never found. Her clothes were never recovered. But the shirt she wore when they found her frayed, old, soaked through was confirmed to be Mason Riley's. His mother identified it by the stitched initials near the collar, a gift she'd made for his 16th birthday. One he never wore to school because he said it made him look soft. Rachel never came home again. Physically, yes, but something else, something essential, never returned with her. It stayed behind, watching, alongside the others. The footage was part of a university project. A forestry student from the state college had been surveying deforestation patterns and tree health, using a consumer drone, nothing special. Just a low-cost model with a high-resolution camera and a gimbal stable enough to map canopy density. The aim was simple. Catalog, tree age, and growth rates across known fire zones in Trussell County. But what the footage revealed had nothing to do with regrowth or soil quality. It had everything to do with the trees themselves. The drone's sweep captured the area from above, gliding over the valley like a silent observer. At first, everything appeared normal. Dense conifer canopy, patches of open ground. A few long dead trunks felled by wind or time. But as the drone banked toward the ridge where the remains had been discovered, a shape began to emerge. Not obvious, not even visible, unless you were looking for it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The trees, specifically, the oldest among them, had grown in a near-perfect circle. Not a ring of young saplings, not a result of modern planting or reforestation patterns. These were ancient, dated by core samples taken decades earlier. Some were estimated to be over 300 years old. Towering, gnarled pines with trunks wide enough to swallow a man whole. And they didn't just surround the burn site, they faced it. Every one of them leaned, subtly but undeniably, inward, as if drawn toward something at the center. Forestry models initially suggested a natural explanation. Soil composition, wind currents, sunlight patterns, reasons trees might curve or cluster. But the curvature was too symmetrical, the spacing too deliberate. Even root structures traced partial arcs underground, forming a radial pattern like spokes in a wheel. When overlaid with satellite maps from the last 50 years, something else became clear. No fires had ever been officially recorded in the center of the circle, and yet every forest blaze within a 10-mile radius had, without fail, curved around that area. Flames diverted. Smoke patterns shifted. The center was always spared, or protected. Experts tried to explain it away. Microclimates, groundwater flow. But none of it accounted for the geometry, for the symmetry, for the feeling. Because it wasn't just shape. It was silence. The audio track from the drone captured ambient forest noise, wind, birds, rustling leaves until it neared the center. Then, nothing. Not static, not malfunction. Just total, suffocating silence. Like sound itself avoided the space. Like it was listening. When the student presented the footage during his final semester presentation, his professor reportedly asked him only one question. "Did you go down there?" The student shook his head. He said he didn't want to. Said something about the drone losing connection mid-flight, as it hovered over the clearing. About how the controls jammed until it passed beyond the circle again. That footage was never uploaded to the public repository. It was copied, downloaded, backed up, then quietly removed from the database. Passed between students, burned to disks, whispered about in late-night dorm rooms. They called it the witness ring. Because that's what it looked like. Not trees grown wild, but placed. Like jurors in some ancient trial, or mourners at a ceremony long forgotten. Watching, always watching, the center. Not protecting it. Containing it. Amid the charred remains and soil scorched so deeply it had turned to glass in places, there were things that had survived. Not many. Most of the evidence had been reduced to fragments, bone, ash, splintered cloth. But a few items remained strangely intact. Or, perhaps more accurately, chosen to remain. The bracelet was found first, twisted around the base of one of the blackened stones, half buried in moss. At first glance, it looked like garbage frayed yarn, dyed in faded pink and green, stained dark with time. But when the forensic tech gently lifted it, they found a plastic bead still attached, the kind you'd buy from a gas station or string together at summer camp. The bead had a single letter pressed into it, an A. It was a match for one of the bracelets Amber and Rachel had made the summer before senior year. A small ritual of their own, each letter representing the first initial of the group, A, M, T, R. 4 teens, 4 strands, but only one was ever recovered. The second item was a digital watch, melted at the edges, its plastic strap fused into a misshapen curve. The screen had bubbled from heat, and yet, somehow, it still blinked. Not the correct time, not even a logical one. The digits flickered in a pattern that didn't make sense. 9 to 66, 0, 333, blank. Then again. The battery, when removed, was swollen but intact, as if the watch had been protected from the worst of the fire, while everything else around it had been devoured. There was no brand logo, no serial number. The third object was the one that drew the most attention. It had been hidden beneath a collapsed root, tucked into the hollow of the fallen oak like it had been placed there. A sketchbook, thin, leather-bound, the edges warped but mostly undamaged. The cover was unmarked. The first few pages were blank. Then the drawings began. Not all of them were dated, but the ones that were fell within a narrow window the 2 weeks before the teenagers vanished. The hand was clearly Amber's. Her art teachers later confirmed it. Yet the content was unlike anything she'd ever turned in for class. Figures dominated the pages, not people, shapes. A tall silhouette looming over trees. No face, just a mass of charcoal black where features should have been. Its head wreathed in smoke that rose like a crown, never the same in any two sketches. Sometimes it dripped, sometimes it spiraled. In one image, it reached upward like fingers. In another, downward like noose ends. Other drawings were even more disturbing depictions of the three teenagers, rendered in meticulous detail, standing in a circle of stones. Each one had their eyes missing, not scratched out, just never drawn. Instead, trails of smoke poured from their empty sockets, curling toward the figure behind them. The last drawing was different. It was of the forest, viewed from above. A perfect circle of trees, leaning inward. At the center was the smoke-crowned figure, smaller now, seated cross-legged in the clearing, its hands resting on the ground. Around it, faint shapes, teeth. Watch faces, ribbons, bones drawn like offerings. The sketchbook ends abruptly after that. The rest of the pages are untouched, as if whatever was being recorded had concluded, or worse, was still ongoing, but had no more need to be drawn. Those items were entered into evidence, cataloged, and locked in storage. But every few years, someone would request to see them. A student, a journalist, an investigator with a theory. Most never returned for a second look. One man, a folklore archivist, asked to buy the sketchbook outright. When denied, he left a note behind. It read, "He doesn't take everything. Just what reminds them they're real." It happened quietly, like so many strange things in Trussell County. No sirens, no headlines, no town-wide alert. Just a report filed by the Forestry Department 2 weeks after the rangers' initial discovery. A standard follow-up inspection had been scheduled, routine protocol after any significant site is found containing human remains. The team consisted of 5 members, 3 fire specialists, a wildlife biologist, and 1 soil recovery technician. All experienced, all familiar with remote terrain, all now gone. They left from the ranger station at dawn. Their vehicle, a standard issue service truck, was outfitted with radio equipment, GPS trackers, emergency kits. A clipboard inside the cab logged the destination, Warden's Hollow Site #4. The same clearing where the bones had been found. They were expected to return by early evening. They never did. At first, no one worried. Field crews often ran long. Spotty reception could delay check-ins. But by nightfall, the dispatcher had grown uneasy. Repeated calls went unanswered. The GPS tracker, which had been working that morning, now showed the vehicle as motionless, parked off a service road that didn't officially exist anymore, overgrown and faded from maps. A secondary team was sent at first light. They found the truck less than a mile from the burn site. Both front doors stood open, the engine still faintly warm. Headlights flickered weakly, dying battery pulsing in a slow, uneven rhythm. The radio crackled with static on every channel. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside, the truck was clean. No blood, no signs of panic. Clipboard sat neatly on the dashboard, a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. One of the crew's jackets was folded in the back seat, as if left behind deliberately. What was missing was any sign of struggle or presence. The forest around them stood still, hushed, as though something sacred or terrible had passed through. The search began immediately. Grid sweeps, dogs, helicopters, drones, Nothing. Then someone noticed the ground. Roughly 50 yards from where the truck had been abandoned, 5 scorched rings were discovered in a crescent shape, each about 4 feet in diameter. The earth inside each one had turned brittle and black, like a campfire long since extinguished, but there was no ash, no wood, no heat signature. Just perfectly burned circles, each with a single item placed at its center. A glove, a utility knife, a name tag, a crushed headset, and a boot, neatly upright, laces tied. The items matched the missing crew. There were no footprints in or out, no drag marks, no broken branches or signs of struggle. It was as if the 5 had simply stepped into the forest and been absorbed, leaving only impressions behind like echoes burned into vinyl. Some theorized environmental causes. Methane pockets. Lightning strikes. But no gases were detected. No storms reported. And the rings were too deliberate. Too symmetrical. A meeting was held behind closed doors. Officials from the fire service, law enforcement, and local government. No statement was released. The case was quietly sealed. The site was reclassified as ecologically unstable, and all public access was barred. But those who had seen the rings, those who stood near them, breathing the strange, metallic tang that lingered in the air, spoke quietly among themselves. Not about fire, not about heat, but about absence. A feeling that the forest had witnessed what happened, that it had participated. It wasn't just taking anymore. It was responding. The legend had always existed on the edges, barely spoken, passed down in the spaces between real history and campfire stories. Not written in any official archive or tourist brochure, not taught in school like the settler myths or folktales about lost miners and haunted rivers. The Fire Watcher was something different, quieter, older. A name not told so much as implied, whispered, omitted. Before the disappearances, few people in Trussell County had even heard the name. And those who had spoke of it, like it was a half-memory, something their grandparents might have mentioned in passing with a shiver or a pause. Don't go walking the North Line after dark, not where the trees lean. The Watcher don't care for mocking. After the second vanishing, though, the stories came back. People who had long kept quiet began to speak. An old trapper recalled a night in the 72nds when he'd set camp near Warden's Hollow and woke to find every stone in his fire pit arranged in a ring, identical, evenly spaced. He swore he hadn't touched them. Swore the air smelled of iron and pine sap and something burning far away. He left at first light and never returned. A school custodian remembered a boy in 1986 who had carved the phrase "he sees us" into the underside of a desk with a compass point. The boy transferred schools 2 weeks later after suffering what the nurse called a night terror so deep it cracked a tooth. His parents refused to talk about it. Years later, that desk was found in storage, the words still faintly visible, surrounded by symbols no one could decipher. Locals began calling it by its old name again, the Fire Watcher. Some said it was a spirit, others a force of nature. Not a ghost, not a god. Just something that had always been here. Something that belonged to the deepest part of the forest, the part where the moss grew too thick, where the roots curled around stone like fingers, where the wind didn't whistle but whispered. The Watcher, they said, guarded the threshold. The boundary between the tame world of paved roads and property lines, and the old world, wild, untamed, sovereign. You could enter its domain, but you couldn't enter lightly. You couldn't laugh, you couldn't mock. Because the Watcher marked you. Not always immediately. Sometimes it waited. Let the doubt fester. Let you forget what you said, what you did. But it never forgot. And it always finished what it started. One folklorist compiled a map of disappearances, unexplainable events, and forest fires in the region spanning the last 100 years. He didn't publish it, said it wasn't ready. But those who saw it said the pattern was clear. A circle around a single point, pulsing outward every few decades like ripples from a stone dropped in black water. In the town library's local history section, a worn slip of paper was found tucked into an old forestry ledger from 1932. No name, no signature. Just one line written in shaking ink. He waits where the fire does not die. He watches where it never began. The townsfolk don't tell the story like a warning anymore. They tell it like an apology. The document was discovered during a renovation of the old county courthouse, tucked behind a false wall in a storage room no one had entered in decades. It had been wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with wax, and tied with twine that disintegrated the moment it was touched. The paper inside was brittle, yellowed with time, but the ink remained startlingly clear, handwritten in looping cursive, with the seal of the town's founding council pressed into the corner. It was dated November 1907. At first glance, it read like a land use agreement or early ordinance, dense and formal, the language archaic. But as the historian assigned to the project read further, the tone shifted. It stopped speaking in legal terms and began to sound more like scripture or confession. The document detailed an agreement, not with another town, not with a governing body, but with an old presence native to the Valley Wood. There was no name, just titles. The keeper below the pines. He who watches the breath of flame. The one that marks. It claimed this being had been acknowledged by the earliest trappers and hunters in the region, who believed the forest would only yield its abundance to those who respected its boundaries. Those who didn't were said to vanish. Or worse, return hollow, eyes burned clean, no memory of the thing that touched them. The pact was simple in its promise. The town would prosper. Winters would be mild, soil fertile, game plentiful. Storms would bend around the valley. Illness would pass through like water over stone. But in return, each season, the town would provide a tithe of presents. No animals, no blood. Just the warm breath of those who know fear. It did not specify how this was to be given, only that it must be given willingly, or the cost would be drawn in heat and ash. At the bottom of the page were 5 signatures. Some were legible names found elsewhere in town records: Whitlow, Granger, Bell. The others were symbols, not crosses or initials. Shapes that echoed the ones later found on the scorched stones in the forest clearing. Symbols that didn't belong to any known language. The document was brought to the local historical society, and then quickly hidden again. Officially, it was dismissed as folklore, an elaborate hoax or part of a forgotten religious sect. But those who handled it spoke of unease, of the paper being warm to the touch, of dreams that began the night after reading it. One archivist, who reviewed the text multiple times, began compiling weather data from the last century. What she found was striking. For nearly 50 years following the pact, Trussell County saw almost no major natural disasters. Crops flourished. Hunting was easy. Then, somewhere in the mid-1960s, it changed. Records of offerings stopped. Church attendance rose. The old trails were bulldozed. People forgot or chose to forget the stories. But the forest didn't. Since then, each decade brought more strange vanishings. Small at first, a lost hiker here, a missing child there. Then came the fires, then the silence. The tithe, it seemed, had been interrupted, and something was remembering its end of the bargain. Now, in the center of town, on a crumbling stone plaque near the courthouse steps, a nearly illegible motto remains carved beneath the town's founding date. Where the flame is watched, the roots grow deep. Most walk past it without noticing. But some, now, are beginning to wonder who or what has been watching the flame all along. The discovery was not intentional. A geological team, hired by the forestry department to assess land stability near Warden's Hollow, brought ground-penetrating radar equipment into the area. It was standard procedure following the disappearance of the fire crew and the renewed public scrutiny that came with it. The team expected fractured bedrock, maybe a sinkhole in formation. What they found instead was a hollow, massive and irregular, hidden beneath layers of dense forest floor, glacial till, and time. The scan revealed an underground cavern stretching more than 60 feet across, beginning just beneath the ritual site. Its walls were uneven, sloped like a bowl carved by something that had neither hand nor tool. The roof of the cavern dipped perilously close to the surface in one place, mere inches from where the stones had been laid in a perfect ring. There was no natural entrance, no visible collapse or access point. Whatever lay beneath had been sealed away by earth and root, its breath stifled but not forgotten. A decision was made to drill a core sample. When the bit reached the chamber, it punched through too easily. The drill seized and died in a puff of smoke. What came up wasn't just soil. It was soot. Black, fine-grained, clinging to gloves and sleeves with an oily persistence. When examined under a microscope, the soot revealed traces of bone ash, mostly animal, but not exclusively. Interspersed were fragments of enamel, calcined beyond recognition, and carbonized fur that belonged to no known species within the region. A probe was lowered into the hollow, carrying a thermal camera. The feed began to glitch as soon as it passed through the breached layer, but a few frames were clear, just enough to send a chill through the lab. The interior of the cavern was coated in dark residue, char climbing the walls like moss. Every surface was scorched, and in the center of the space, just barely visible through the feed, was a single stone structure. An altar, or something like it. Monolithic, flat-topped, rising from the floor, with no seam or connection to the surrounding rock. Blackened entirely, but still distinct in shape. A low platform with no markings, no adornment. It did not look carved, it looked placed. The feed cut out. The probe went dark. Later, when a small exploratory team descended through a manually widened opening, they confirmed what the scan had shown. The cavern was suffocating, the air metallic, thick with the memory of fire. And the altar, though it showed no sign of flame, was warm to the touch. Measured at nearly 90 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the freezing winter above, no heat source, no logical explanation. Around it, in the shadows of the hollow, lay remains. Hundreds of them. Animal skeletons arranged without pattern, as if they had crawled toward the altar and simply expired. Some were burned, others untouched, but every skull faced inward, toward the stone. One team member reported feeling pressed down upon while in the chamber, not watched, held, as if the space itself was sentient, as if it were remembering. The team exited within 15 minutes. No samples were taken, no further descent authorized. The breach was resealed and buried under the guise of safety. But the altar remains below, waiting. Still warm. The ranger had not spoken the names in years, not aloud. He carried them like splinters in the back of his throat, always present, never removed. Amber Cho, Mason Riley, Tyler Vance. He saw them in dreams, not as they were, but as the bones he'd found, burned clean, folded into themselves like something sacred or punished. He didn't know which. Elias Brewer had retired without ceremony, packed his few belongings from the ranger station into a single cardboard box, nodded to the map on the wall like it was an old friend, and left. No farewell speech, no party. Just a quiet step into the life that waited for those who survived what others couldn't explain. He lived alone now, on the outskirts of town, in a cabin surrounded by pine and fog, still close enough to the forest to hear it breathe. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. No postage. No return address. Just his name, scrawled in block letters across the front. The paper was rough, heavy, as though the weight of what it contained had soaked into the fibers. He opened it slowly, hands trembling more than he liked to admit. Inside was a photograph. Not a copy, not a scan, a real photo. Matte finish. Old stock paper, undamaged, the kind you developed in a darkroom, the kind no one used anymore. In the photo, 3 teenagers stood inside the circle of stones, laughing. Faces lit with mischief, their arms slung over each other's shoulders like they hadn't a single worry in the world. Amber wore a thrifted jacket with patches along the sleeves. Mason held the camcorder in one hand, mid-laugh, mouth open. Tyler, quieter as always, looked just slightly off camera, his smile unsure. The stones around them were already scorched. And behind them, just beyond the circle, at the edge where the shadows thickened into black, stood something else. It was tall, towering, blurred not by motion, but by absence. Like the lens hadn't captured it fully, like it resisted being seen. Its form was humanoid in the loosest sense, elongated limbs, no face. Only a darkness that deepened toward where the head should have been. But what held Brewer's breath fast in his chest was the smoke. A crown of it. It rose from the thing's head in slow, curving strands, coiling like incense through the trees. Crown-like, alive, watching. The teens didn't see it. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was why they were smiling. Brewer stared at the image for hours. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He only breathed, slowly, as though exhaling too fast might wake something. When night came, he placed the photo in the fireplace. He watched it curl and blacken. The edges turned first, then the faces, then the crown. The paper didn't crumple like normal, it folded inward, collapsing like a dying thing. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees creaked, not with the usual groan of old bark, but with something more deliberate, almost like syllables, almost like names. Amber, Mason, Tyler. Returned. Not to the world, but to the story. And the story was still being told.